Hey everyone, I'm Ermysenigma, welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is El Dino Volador. The son of gangster Osaurus doesn't want to continue the family business. Instead, he wants to become a wrestler. He's got everything he needs, the charisma, the power, the cool name, El Dino Volador. He might even be better than his idol Plymouth. And as you can tell from the design, this monster is basically a combination of gangster Osaurus and Plymouth. Overall, a really amazing design in my opinion, and he's actually a pretty powerful monster. And so as of the time recording this video, there's a total of 23 nature legendary monsters, so I'm going to be comparing El Dino to the remaining monsters. Starting things off with power, he boasts an impressive power of 3,509, which actually places him in second place, tied with Apex. He's second only to the Judgment, who has a power of 3,542. And next up is his life, which is rather average at 29,255. In the nature category, this puts him in 13th place along with monsters like Drek, Roasty, and Colklin. And as for his speed, he has a speed of 3,421, and this is where it gets interesting. This isn't necessarily an ideal speed because this monster actually has an AoE stun. That's right, he's a nature monster with an AoE stun skill, making him a top tier denier because currently there's no nature monster with an AoE deny skill besides Roasty, but Roasty is incredibly slow with a speed of 3,080, so this monster is the next best thing. However, the only one problem with the Dino Volador is that he doesn't have that top tier speed of 3,465, however it's only a few points off. So considering most wars, most battles, if you can just give yourself a rune advantage, if you activate your rune guardian, you can get the advantage over your enemy even if they have the exact same runes as you. So I'm gonna say it's not that much of a problem. In the nature category, this actually puts him in 8th place along with Aldous' pet. Of all the nature monsters faster than El Dino, the only two monsters that are considered deny monsters are Lamu and Sarah. However, they can only single deny, and I guess you can count in Guava Juice. However, the best Guava Juice can do is an AoE blind followed by an AoE daze. So although Dino Volador doesn't have the best speed in the nature category, you're gonna find out that he's quite a top tier monster. And to make things even better, he comes with immunity to stun. That's right, monsters like Sarah, monsters like General Aldous, they can't immobilize El Dino because he's immune to stun. And need I mention that having this immunity makes him an ideal monster to use in Earth Wars, even in some Dark Wars where the monster has an AoE stun skill. And actually, speaking of dark monsters, this monster you're gonna find out also has self skills. So not only is he immune to stun, he's also in effect by his skills immune to possession. So not only is he good against dark monsters, because they can stun and possess you, he's also good against magic monsters. This monster is all around a really good monster, and you're also going to see his skills. Even though he's a nature monster, he has magic skills, he has special base skills. He is truly quite a unique monster. And so anyways, let's move on to skills. His ultimate attack is called El Dino Finisher, deals massive special damage to all enemies. This skill is a special base skill that deals 75 damage to all of the enemy monsters. Now overall, I would have to say this skill is so-and-so. It is definitely extremely powerful because it's 75 damage and it's special based. However, if you're running this monster with 3 speed runes, you're not going to be able to take advantage of your ultimate that much. It would have been nice if it had some extra effect like bleeding, maybe poison, maybe both of them, and maybe if the damage output was less, that way you can benefit from DOT. However, if you were to run this monster as an attacker, maybe even with just one strength rune or maybe 2 strength runes, then he could deal some serious damage with his ultimate attack. So right now it's just so-and-so, it's a rather vanilla skill, and the usability of his ultimate attack really depends on how you build your monster. And in skills group 1, the only skill I want to talk about is Maroma Mortal, which heals by 30%. So here we have your very first self skill, which only costs 24 stamina and it has no cooldown, so you can essentially spam the skill if you needed to, and I like the skill because it heals your life by 30%. Now if you're running your monster as a deny monster with all speed runes, and his main objective is to go first in an AoE stun, and then suppose maybe you missed the stun on one of the monsters and your other teammates weren't able to finish off that monster, maybe your El Dino is going to take damage, in which case it's really nice to have this self skill because you can heal yourself. Or let's say you've taken damage originally and you're facing off Lamu and Lamu possesses you, well, you can just heal yourself instead of having to recharge, and this can only cost 24 stamina, so it's a really low stamina cost. And I will say right off the bat, this monster does have 2 other self skills, but ultimately I think this is the best one if you're going with the all speed route. While the other 2 self skills, they're kind of more beneficial if you're going for an attacker build. And so anyways, moving on over to skills group 2, we have Monster Slam, and check out this skill, it's a magic based skill. Deals heavy magic damage, maced and target requires cooldown. So this skill deals 50 magic based damage to a single enemy, costs 28 stamina, 2 chain cooldown, and it can stun. Now the cool thing about being a magic based attack is that you actually have an elemental advantage over metal monsters, and considering you can find yourself facing all sorts of different monster elements in Team Wars because of the different books, it's really nice to have a nature based monster that also has an elemental advantage over metal monsters. And so overall this skill is really good because it also applies stun. And in the nature category, the only other 2 monsters besides El Dino that are immune to stun are Sarah and Golem, so you can pretty much immobilize the majority of nature monsters with this attack. And if you're going for a deny build on this monster, I would highly recommend Monster Slam, because let's face it, sometimes you can't rely on an AoE. Sometimes it's just better to single immobilize, just immobilize that main threat. and a 90% accuracy versus 95% accuracy, I'd rather take my chances with the 95% accuracy. And then you never know, there's just situations where the battles are really long and drawn out, in which case you'll be able to utilize a stun after an AoE stun. And as far as using this skill on an attacker build set, well, it's still a really good skill. I mean, what's not to like? It can stun, 50 damage, magic based damage, elemental advantage against metal monsters, and so the overall verdict of this skill, whether you're going attacker or deny build, you should definitely run this skill. Next up we have Moonstersault, deals very heavy nature damage, Mayday's target requires cooldown. So here we have an attack that targets a single enemy, dealing 65 damage, 31 stamina cost, 1 turn cooldown, that's pretty darn low, and it also dazes. Now 65 damage is really strong, especially considering this monster has the second highest power in the nature category. And the cool thing about this nature based attack is that you also have an elemental advantage against magic monsters. So even with rather mediocre runes, if you go with the attacker build set and you run this skill and you're facing off against a magic monster, you're pretty much going to be able to knock them out in one hit. And so I would only recommend this skill set on an attacker build. If you're going for the deny build, then you don't need the skill at all. Next up we have Plymouth's Mission. Target heals by 25%, may apply damage boost to ally, requires cooldown. Here we have his other self skill, it costs 27 stamina, however this has a 2 turn cooldown, so you won't be able to spam this. If you were to get 2 turn possession for example, you wouldn't be able to use this back to back. And so the thing about this skill is that you heal by 25%, so that's 5% less than the skill from skills group 1, however you gain a damage boost. Now as I said, if you're going with the deny build, you're really not going to benefit too much on that damage boost. If you're going for an attacker build however, that's when that damage boost would come in handy, because then your attacks would be 50% stronger. And so I would recommend definitely do not run the skill on a deny build. On an attacker build however, you may want to run it. I can't say for sure that you want to run it because he has another version of this skill in skills group 3. So let's talk about skills group 3 now. We start things off with Monster Suplex, deals moderate magic damage to all enemies, may stun all targets, requires cooldown. Here we have an AoE magic based attack that deals 35 damage to all of the enemy monsters, costs 37 stamina, 3 turn cooldown, but that's not important. What's important is that it's an AoE stun. And so we finally have a feasible nature monster to use with an AoE deny skill. Dino Volador, thank you for having Monster Suplex, AoE stun, what's not to love? You definitely want to run this skill regardless of what kind of build you do, because even if you're going for an attacker route, you don't always have to one hit the enemy. Maybe your deny monster can deny the enemy by means of possession or freeze, and then maybe you can have Dino go last and then you can just do AoE stun and they're immobilized again. And not only will they be immobilized, they're probably going to be on the verge of dying, because if you're running an attacker with an AoE stun, they're probably going to have 2 strength runes and they're going to deal a lot of damage to the enemy monsters. And so it goes without saying, this is a must-have skill. Next up we have Plancha Splash, deals moderate nature damage to all enemies, may daze all targets, requires cooldown. So here we have a nature based attack, a nature based AoE actually, that deals 45 damage to all the enemy monsters. That's extremely powerful, 37 stamina cost, 2 turn cooldown, that's pretty low, and it also is an AoE daze. And so even if the enemy monsters happen to survive, they're all going to be dazed now, which is 25% less damage output and 25% less accuracy. And so this is definitely another skill you want to have, because after you do your AoE stun skill, you're probably going to want to do your AoE daze skill, especially if all of the enemy monsters are still alive. That way all of those enemy monsters will either miss their attacks or inflict less damage if they do land a hit on you. And so that's on a deny build. And so obviously this skill can also work on an attacker build, because after you do your 35 AoE magic based attack, you can follow it up with the AoE 45 nature based attack, and these two skills back to back are pretty much guaranteed to knock out all of the enemy team. And you know what, just to bring up Moonstersault again, because I don't want to completely dismiss it, I know I said on a deny build you don't really need it, but another way of thinking is that after you do Monster Suplex, if you have an attacker, a really strong attacker that can eliminate 1 or 2 of the enemy monsters, when it's Dino's turn again, if there's only 1 enemy monster alive, then in that case there's really not much use to have an AoE daze skill. Then maybe it is better to have a single daze skill, because not only is it quite powerful, because even with base stats, you're going to deal quite a bit of damage, it still has the same effect. You're going to be dazing one enemy monster. So that's one way of thinking of it. There's ultimately no correct way of building a monster because there's so many different scenarios. Overall though, I would have to say that the majority of players that don't have really extremely high level runes, I'm talking 8, 9, 10, maybe after doing Monster Suplex, even your attacker won't be able to eliminate all of the enemy monsters. Most likely they'd at best be able to eliminate 1 monster, which is why I'm recommending the AoE skill. But it ultimately really depends on you and what kind of runes you have, what kind of opponents you're facing. There's so many different factors to consider. And with that being said, the final skill we have is La Voladora Special. Gains immunity to freeze, may give double damage to ally, requires cooldown. So here we have a self skill that costs 28 stamina, has a 3 turn cooldown, so that's way higher than the other two, and you get freeze immunity, which is really nice, and you get double damage, which would be extremely beneficial on an attacker build. Because let's just say for example you started the game off by getting possessed, the enemy was faster than you, they possessed your monster, doesn't matter, now you give yourself freeze immunity and you give yourself double damage. So you already got rid of the possession, you now have freeze immunity and you're inherently immune to stun, and so you're basically protected from the main deny skills. And then on the following turn you can do what is essentially a 60 damage AoE stun skill or a 90 damage AoE daze skill. Regardless, both of these skills are going to do massive damage. And don't completely count this skill as not being useful on a deny build, because even on a deny build, even though it has base power, once you give him double damage, considering he has 45 damage AoE skills, or if you wanted to run that 65 damage skill, he can still pack quite a punch. But the cool thing about this is ultimately the immunity to freeze. This can definitely come in handy in so many situations. At the same time though, you can just build around fighting freeze monsters with this monster, so I would have to say on a deny build, it's not really needed that much. But similarly, you can say the same thing about healing. You can say the healing isn't really needed if your main purpose is to immobilize the enemy, and then your attackers are supposed to do the rest. If it comes back to your turn, you can just AoE daze or single daze. There's not really much of a need to heal with the deny monster. It can definitely come in handy in multiple situations, but it's not a necessary requirement. There are plenty of deny monsters that have no heal skills, and they do plenty fine. They don't even take damage in most games. And so between all of the sub skills, the one I would least recommend would be Plymouth Submission. And then if you're going for an attacker build, I highly recommend La Voladora Special. And lastly, if you're going for a pure deny build, which would be 3 speedruns, I would recommend La Voladora Special or Maroma Mortal. And as for the must-have skill on both skill sets, it would be Monster Suplex. You definitely want to run this AoE stun skill. As far as the other skills, it's really up to you. The other 2 skills or 3 skills, you can pick them whatever you like. On the attacker build, for example, you can run Monster Suplex, and I would most likely recommend Moonsault because of the high damage output. And then as for picking Monster Slam or Plancha Splash, it's really up to you. Do you like having 2 AoEs on an attacker, or do you prefer having an immobilizing single target skill on an attacker? And like with many attackers, for runes you want to go 2 strength runes and a speed rune, or depending on what kind of gameplay you're on, 2 strength runes and a team speed rune. And as for the deny build, as I already mentioned, you want to go 3 speed runes, you want to run Monster Suplex, one of the self skills, and then once again it's ultimately your choice. Monster Slam, Plancha Splash, or Moonsault, although myself personally I would recommend Plancha Splash and Monster Slam. And then the last thing we need to talk about is using this monster on defense. I think this is a really good nature monster to put on defense, and if you want a strictly defensive build, I would recommend Monster Suplex, Plancha Splash, Monster Slam, and Moonsault. And the reason you're running these skills on defense is because you want whatever the AI to do something. Monster Suplex will be an AoE stun, Plancha Splash will be an AoE daze, reduces damage output and their accuracy, Monster Slam a single stun. So yeah, it's not as good as the AoE stun, but at least one of the enemy monsters may be immobilized. And Moonsault daze while also packing a punch. And if you're making this monster for pure defensive purposes, there's different rune options you can do. One is the obvious 3 speed runes, and hope that your monster can go first and hopefully do the AoE stun. However, that's not really likely, not to mention that in most battles the enemies will only face you if they're faster than you. So if you operate under the assumption that they're going to get the first turn in, maybe you can build them just to last longer, in which case 1 life, 1 speed, and 1 strength rune. That way, even if the enemy monster does happen to go first, if they're using a nature deny monster, while Sarah can't immobilize you, Lemu can possess you, but the enemy doesn't know if you have a self skill, the enemy might have better things to do than deny Aldina with possession, and maybe they'll possess your attacker, in which case if your Aldina goes next and does an AoE stun, you're kind of in the clear for the next turn. And so all in all, a truly fantastic monster, so many different ways to build this monster, so many different ways to utilize them. You can use them for offense, for attacking, or for denying, or you can use them for defense. There's just so many different ways. Overall, I would have to say he's just one of the best additions to the nature elements. He's just so amazing, he's all around a good monster, amazing stats, amazing traits, amazing skills. And yeah, that's going to conclude this analysis. Now I want to hear from all of you guys. What do you think about this monster? Is he good? Is he not so good? Did I give him too much credit, not enough credit? How do you think he compares to the other monsters? How do you think he compares if you use him as an attacker? How do you think he compares if you use him as a deny monster? What would you use this monster if you had him? Would you use him for defense? Would you use him for offense? If for offense, like, just let me know. Whatever's going on through your thoughts about this monster, please let me know in the comments below. With that being said, best of luck to all of you on your Monster Legends adventures. Like always, remember to dream big and pursue your passions.